And to introduce Fyto, we have Tom Shields from AgFunder. Tom.
Hey there. Sorry, just getting my AgFunder background going to make sure I was fully set up.
Beautiful.
Yeah, let me introduce Jason real quick. Jason, so when I was an entrepreneur, always the problem I had when pitching my company was either I'd be very specific about what I was trying to get done, and then it didn't seem like it was a big enough idea, or I'd talk about the vision, and then everybody'd say, well, you're not focused enough. And so there's always this sort of dichotomy between, telling the vision and having a focused and specific execution plan. And I just want to say that Jason is one of these rare entrepreneurs who can really think at both of these levels at the same time. So you're going to hear what is a big vision story about really a new form of agriculture that I think is sustainable and automatable and highly effective. But you're also going to hear about some very specific ways that he's making that real and growing plants and feeding them to cows and demonstrating value, right? So to me, that's what makes this opportunity so exciting. So Jason, take it away.
Thanks so much, Tom. And also, Tom will tell you that I have a tendency to have kind of resting bored voice. Even if I sound bored, I'm actually super pumped about what we're talking about today. So I'm going to try to muster my enthusiastic voice, but if it drones on, just let me know. I'm going to go to share screen here. And away we go. Can you guys see that? Okay, yeah. Great. So thanks so much again for having me. And to Nick and Howard and Alina for putting on this awesome program and including me. It's really an honor to be involved with so many informed audience members and really accomplished groups and entrepreneurs. So thanks again. So I want to give you a brief glimpse, the time we have today, into what Fyto's working on, where we really feel very excited about the potential to produce a step change in sustainable agriculture. And I'll get to what that means. So let's get into it. What problem we're trying to solve is really this global catastrophic food security issue that we're experiencing. And I don't like to be too doomsday. So this is not a photoshopped image. This is actually just how we do pastured agriculture now. In this image, you're actually seeing parts of the Amazon rainforest being burned down for pasture land and for soy, over 70% of which is going to feed cows. And before we're too harsh on Brazil, it's important to remember that the US deforested our virgin forests for the last 200 years. So we're just further ahead in respect to deforestation. And again, this is because, there's food demands that need to be met. And the FAO projects that 2 times the food is going to be required in the next 30 years. And unfortunately, the cards are stacked against us when you look at another statistic that they provide, which is that 33% of our global arable land has been degraded or desertified in the last few decades alone. So we have to think of ways to grow more food, more nutritious food on less resources. And just to make it really interesting, we have this changing climate that's both due to agricultural practices and deeply affecting agricultural practices. So if we were to just sum it up, you have almost a quarter of our anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions coming from food, ag, and the land uses, land practices to grow food. So we need agriculture to get better faster. And if you look at the progress that's been made in the last 60 years, it's been substantial. If you look at the Green Revolution and genetic engineering and many other technologies, we've been able to double or triple the yields of our most important commodity crops that feed people and feed animals. And that's not to be ignored. That's a huge testament to human ingenuity. But frankly, it's not enough, especially when we look at these numbers we're expecting for the next few decades. So we grow something a little different. You're not going to find it on that slide yet, although I have a future slide where you will. We grow aquatic plants. We think of them as super plants because they're packed with nutrients. And we're not just talking about crude protein values and starch values. We're talking about crops that have uniquely suited amino acid profiles that match what a dairy cow needs, what a laying hen needs to make eggs, and various other animals. It's super important to have the right nutritional match for these animals if you're trying to get healthy, productive animals to continue growing food. So our plants are extremely productive in terms of their doubling rate. It's unlike anything you'd see in a land crop. So we have doubling every few days, year round in the right climates. And something that's really important to those yields is, if you're looking here at an image of one of our harvests where we have the whole crop in that basket, and the whole crop is edible, the whole crop is nutrient dense. There's not chaff or waste materials that you'd expect in almost any other land crop. And that adds up to big gains in terms of yields. And just as exciting as, what does it take to make this crop? We use an order of magnitude lower water, land, and energy use. We use no synthetic fertilizer, herbicide, or pesticide. That's allowed us to get certified organic in the last few months, which is a big deal for us. But you might be asking a question that I certainly asked at the start of this many years ago, which is, why, if this nutritional yield is possible, has this not been done before? And that's a complicated answer, which I'll try to sum up. So in some ways it has been done before. We've seen for thousands of years, farmers finding in wild rivers, ponds, aquatic plants and feeding them to animals. There's documented evidence of this on nearly every continent. But that's been somewhat serendipitous, where people would find this crop and they would feed it to their animals. In terms of intensified or intentional production of aquatic plants, that's really in its nascent years. And I was humbled the first time I tried to grow these plants, at first because it wasn't like planting a tomato and fertilizing it and waiting for the results. These plants move a lot faster. So just as they grow many, many times faster than terrestrial crops, that means that they can go south many times faster. So it's a very fast moving response time. The cycles involved are very rapid, and you have to tend to their needs in that way. So it's very labor intensive. If you think about planting a field of beans, imagine if you had to fertilize and harvest those beans every day of the year. And that's a little bit more like what we're doing. So we're really excited about the yields. This is a graph that shows you our current yields if we were to overlay them on traditional commodity crops. And you can see that looks like a step change. And that's awesome. And we're really excited about that. But we have a ton of work ahead of us, and I'll get to what that looks like. And just as important as these yields, which is essentially a measurement of land use efficiency, which is important, we're also using much less water. We're completely renewably powered in terms of energy, and I'll show you some images. We're using zero synthetic inputs, which is how we were able to get organic certification. So we think those are really important too, not just that you have more food, but that it's made in a more sustainable way. So the whole premise of Fyto is, okay, there's these aquatic plants that have been realized for their value long before I thought of this. There've been documented evidence of this for thousands of years. But how do we grow these at scale? And how do you do it without an army of farm labor? Because that's what it would require if you were to do this manually. So the premise of Fyto was, we would need to invent an entire system, a process, and all the associated technologies that allow you to grow these plants at scale that are affordable. Because people are not going to switch to crops that are more sustainable unless they're also affordable. And we have ambitions to have this be readily adopted by farms all over the world. So from day one, it's been extremely important to have the cost of production be competitive with commodity crops. And that requires really thinking outside the box on how you might do this. So we had the advantages of this being a very special and unique plant that's unlike those land plants. For one thing, they can flow. So instead of having to till a field and plant seed, you flow your crops into an engineered pond. And instead of seed, they reproduce asexually. So they reproduce in place, and that's part of the way in which they're able to double every few days. So when you look at all the things that a farmer might do to keep a pond of aquatic plants productive, scanning the plants, harvesting the plants, feeding them regularly, monitoring their nutrient densities, looking for pests, we're systematically developing technologies that take the farmer out of that loop and automate the process. And we think that's essential, because if a dairy farmer is going to want to feed a cow our material, they're not going to want to learn how to become an aquatic plant farmer along the way. They're pretty busy as is. So this is sort of the point of our technology, is that it's automatable, it's scalable, it's modular, and it leverages technologies that even a decade ago weren't necessarily affordable, but today are. And we did not think that we'd be very successful by designing all this in a vacuum. We had our ideas of how we might grow these plants and what would be interesting and valuable to farmers. But instead, we wanted to start early working on active livestock operations and proving the value proposition and improving the value proposition by working with the farmers directly. So we have two sites right now that are on active livestock operations, and some of the compelling value proposition elements that are rising to the top are the idea of affordable organic. So an organic farmer has to pay typically twice as much as a conventional farmer to feed their animals, and so they're priced out of having very many options. And the idea that something really nutrient dense could also be affordable and could be closer to a conventional commodity is really attractive to these farmers. And that doesn't just help the current organic farmers, but it helps farmers that want to become organic have less of a price shock to switch. Fully automated is really important, as I mentioned, but so is operating this as a service. So our vision is that for on-farm production, if we're on a dairy and we're making these super plants, that the farmer doesn't have to actually do anything. They're just going to tell us how much they need, and they buy feed per ton in accordance with how they currently buy feed. So priced into our unit economics is the assumption that we'll operate this system for them. And that's largely only possible because it's an automated system that requires very little intervention from us. Stable year-round supply is an incredibly prescient issue these days in terms of if you look at how the prices on alfalfa and silage and corn and soy are shifting rapidly, rising and falling. It's very hard to project your budgets for the year. And if you had the ability to have some sense of the stability of the crop, it would be incredibly helpful and it would relieve a lot of stress. I won't read all the other bullets, but we have just some really compelling value propositions that largely came about because we were working with farmers from the very early days of the company, and we continue to do so. So what does a day at the office look like for us? Like any tech startup, we usually have our heads down, working toward our milestones and, trying to execute on the plan and iterate on the plan. But every once in a while, we remember to look up and we see a cow, and we remember that we're doing something super interesting, where we're working with our heroes, essentially, these farmers, providing this special feed that's grown by solar-powered robots. And it's super fun. And it's just a really amazing way to spend your day. And so I have this awesome team. It's a small team that's growing, that's all really focused on this problem, where we're trying to push the boundaries of what's possible on a farm, but we're also trying to embed ourselves in the realities of day-to-day farming. And we don't want this to be a 10-year out solution. We want to have this have impact immediately. And we're not stopping at cows. It's a very exciting market when you look at the 1 billion cows that are on the planet that consume 50 pounds and above per day of feed. So we could be busy with that for a while, but we're also starting to feed poultry, and that's 25 billion chickens on the planet, another billion sheep, another several hundred million pigs, and we're also interested in feeding people because we've tested our products for nutritional compatibility for human nutrition, and we have all the essential amino acids. We didn't start there because we think there's immediate pain points in livestock that we can solve, but we're super interested in expanding in all those markets in the future. And when you add it all up, if you look at, again, agriculture and land use associated with agriculture, there's a big dent of our carbon emissions as a species that we could take out by improving the efficiency. And so if we look at our product offerings, animal feeds, biofertilizer, and just the nutrient management and the manure management that we're doing, the operation that I showed on the dairy farm, one of our only inputs to that farm is processed animal waste. So we're actually solving two problems for the farmer, where we're able to feed our super plants the waste products of these animals, and then we were able to upgrade them to a really healthy protein for the cows. So that manure management, where otherwise you'd have high emitting methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, is being upgraded into a feed component and offsetting the trucking in of feed that they would otherwise have to buy. So it's sort of a twofer. And we see a very real pathway to having over a gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions reduced per year at scale. So it's going to take a ton of work to reach that scale. We're really excited about the progress we've made thus far, but we're a company that's been in operation for under 2 years. So we're seeking partners and early adopters to continue trying our products and help us make more and more useful things. We're seeking a world-class team. We're building it actively. So if you can check on our website, we're posting more and more jobs each quarter. And we're launching a major fundraise at the early part of next year to join our amazing funders thus far, including AgFunder, Bolt, CityLight, First Star, Refactor, and Shocks. These are really amazing funders and have had our back. And we want to add to that family of funders with other investors. So with that, I hope there are some questions that I can answer, and I really appreciate the opportunity today.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that, Jason. And we'll just jump right into it. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to pose first? Don't be shy. Begin talking.
I have a question.
Sure, go right ahead.
I may have missed the if you described a little bit more about what your plant actually is. This is like an algae type. It's a grown in the sea product.
Great question. So it's not an algae, and that's partially because I worked on algae for about 4 years right out of school, and I decided never to work on algae again.
Okay.
It was an amazing eye-opening experience in terms of seeing what's possible. Algae is really compelling still, but I think there's some fundamental technological and economic variables that have to be worked out.
Because I think, well, the reason I asked that question is because I've seen announcements that the problem with beef has to do not only with the energy, et cetera, used in the land, but also with the methane, the cow farts, effectively, and that there's a technology using a particular type of algae to dramatically improve the sustainability of beef if you can feed the cows that type of algae.
Yeah,
so I'm just curious if that would fit somehow.
Absolutely. So the enteric emissions, which is the polite way of describing what you were calling the front end of the back end of the cow emissions. There have been studies done where Asparagopsis, a seaweed, has shown reduction, and some of the explanations for why that works would apply to our plant as well. We just haven't been able to test that yet. So that's something we're super interested in seeing how we affect the actual enteric emissions from the animal itself. But the embodied emissions from the feed production and the waste management actually outpace that issue. It's also a really important one, so we want to follow it. But we're growing largely macrophytes, which are they seem kind of like algae. They're floating aquatic plants that grow in fresh water, and we're farming them on non-arable land often. So it's not in the ocean, but it's also not competing with farm grade cropland necessarily. So that opens up a number of environments you can imagine for growing these nutritious plants.
Great.
And I see Mariano has a question with his hand raised. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I know that you're not getting into like human food, even though the nutritional profile is good, but I have to know, how does it taste?
That's a great question. And I won't name which investor, but one of our investors, before I could open my mouth to tell him what we were making, he just popped one of our pellets in his mouth and started chewing, which, gave him a lot of street cred with us. It's good. I think it's pretty inoffensive. It tastes like a leafy green, and it kind of depending on whether it's fresh or dry, but it's very palatable to the animals we've been feeding. And of course, I've had to try it on several occasions just to, let's see what we're making here. I think there's a lot of promise for it to be a compelling food, and there are companies working on aquatic plant food products, and we think there's going to be room for many companies to use these special types of plants in different markets. But we haven't yet done taste testing with a large audience, so stay tuned, and I'll send you a sample.
There you go. All right, I think we have time for one more question. Shauna, do you have something you want to ask?
I do, just a quick one. So obviously getting animal nutritionists on board is mission critical. What have you done, or have you started down the path of doing some peer reviewing through, extension or universities to kind of get that process in motion?
Yeah, excellent point. So the nutritionist is kind of the keys to the kingdom when it comes to these livestock farmers, because they're the advisors, the trusted advisors that determine what the ration for the animal is going to be. So we have our own nutritionists on staff. We also work closely with nutritionists at our customer sites, and we've reached out to many of the awesome extension agents in Northern California, where we're based, to learn how we can scale this faster and how we can make sure that we're hitting the right problems nutritionally and environmentally. So that's really important aspect of our work, and one that's going to continue to grow with the company.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're just about out of time. Jason, thank you so much for your presentation. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.